Welcome to Villanova University, the Center for Church Management, and the second in our three-part webinar series on Latino congregations and Catholic foundations. My name is Matt Davis. I'm the Associate Director for the Center for Church Management. It is my joy and pleasure to welcome you today. So to honor our Augustinian Catholic tradition here at Villanova, I'm going to invite you to pray quietly with me these words of wisdom from St. Augustine. So if you want to take a second to quiet yourself, quiet your hearts and minds, maybe take a deep breath as we quietly pray together. Walking by faith, let us do good works. In these, let there be a free love of God for his own sake and an active love for our neighbor. For there is nothing we can do for God, but because we have something we can do for our neighbor, we shall by our good offices to the needy gain the favor of him who is the source of all abundance. Let us then do what we can for others. Let us freely bestow upon the needy out of our abundance. Amen. All right, the mission for the Center for Church Management is to provide education and scholarship in the Augustinian Catholic tradition on strategic, management, and financial matters in service to leaders of churches and other Christian faith-based ministries. Here in the center, we try to take the best of the management, business, strategic planning, financial world, and we adapt it and we integrate it, and we use it to try to help churches better serve their mission to live and share the gospel of Jesus Christ. We've got three main branches of the Center for Church Management. The first one, our really most important one for us, is our Masters of Science in Church Management. It's a 30-credit degree program from the Villanova School of Business. It's a 2-year online program, both live and asynchronous learning. We're currently accepting students right now, or applications now, for our 2024 cohort, which starts in May. In this program, you do a deep dive into HR for churches and strategic planning for churches, finances for churches. I'm a 2021 grad and really could not say enough good things about the program. We also have 3 non-credit certificates. We have an online church management, which is really that master's program, but just a small taste of it with 12 lectures, which are 1.5 hours over 9 months. We also have a church management for men in formation. This is for men that are in their last 2 years of seminary formation to be a priest, or men that are under 5 years ordained as a priest. It's a crash course in church management and planning and leadership. It's 1 week on campus at Villanova, and it's free, which is always great. So if you know any priests or people in seminary formation to be interested, please let us know. Lastly, in our non-credit certificates, we have our Catholic School Management Online Certificate. This is for Catholic school administrators, principals, assistant principals, rising leaders. It's the management business part directed specifically towards Catholic schools. Our third branch of our Center for Church Management is research and scholarship. Some of our research and scholarship is done by the center itself or other Villanova faculty. And some of it, we sponsor researchers and leaders, thought leaders from other institutions. And today we have an example of that with Kristina. So I want to go over the agenda for today. In a second, I'll introduce our presenter today, Kristina. She'll then do her presentation. We'll hold our question and answer till the very end. If you have questions that you want to ask at any time during Kristina's presentation, please put them in the chat box. I'll be looking for them and I'll give them to Kristina at the end. A reminder to keep yourself on mute during her presentation, and that we're going to try to wrap up today at 3 p.m. after 1 hour. Oops, let me get this fixed. So I'm now happy to welcome our presenter, Kristina Lizardy-Hajbi. She's Assistant Professor of Leadership and Formation and the Director of the Office of Professional Formation at the Iliff School of Theology. Her research interests lie at the intersection of pastoral leadership, congregational studies, and theory and practice within Black, Indigenous, and other people of color communities. She's an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ. Please join me in welcoming Kristina.
Matt, thank you so much for having me this afternoon. It's good to see all of you today. And I want to thank the Villanova University Center for Church Management. I had the honor and privilege of serving as a research fellow for the 22-23 academic year, and am really grateful to the center for the opportunity to do this research, much of which I will share with you this afternoon. So I'm going to share my screen and begin to share with you about finances in U.S. Latino congregations, analyses from FACT and EPIC. And I will share about what FACT and EPIC are in just a moment. So, an overview first about Latinos in the United States. They constitute 18.7% of the U.S. population. We are the second fastest growing racial ethnic group, so we constitute half of total US population growth from 2010 to 2020. And as you know, Latinos are not a monolithic group. We come from a variety of countries and ethnic groups of people who trace their heritage to Central and South America, the Caribbean, and Spain. And you might also know that we Latinos do not have a consensus on how we call ourselves. So Latino is one way that we describe ourselves. Hispanic is another, Latin American, more gender inclusive terms, Latinx, Latine, which are becoming more prevalent. And then we have more specific terms for different ethnic groups like Chicano, Hispano, Boricua, of which I am. And we speak a variety of languages, so English, Spanish, Portuguese, and indigenous languages that are found throughout North America, Central America, and South America. So what are FACT and EPIC? You may not know about these particular research projects, but they are organized by the Hartford Institute for Religion Research and under the leadership of Dr. Scott Thumma. FACT is the Faith Communities Today survey. It's actually a series of surveys that have been conducted since the year 2000. And so it's a 20-year-old panel survey with periodic surveys that tracks U.S. congregational life over time. The EPIC study is the Exploring the Pandemic Impact on Congregations research project. Now, this is a specific Lilly Endowment-funded 5-year research project to understand possible changes and long-term implications the pandemic might have on congregational life in the U.S. And there are a number of pieces related to this research project. There are panel surveys, national surveys, and regional ethnographic case studies that are taking place in 8 regions across the United States. So if you want to learn more about both of these studies, I invite you to go on the respective websites, and I'll be sharing those websites at the end of this presentation. The specific data that I used for this research project comes from the Faith Communities Today 2020 National Survey of Congregations. This was the largest survey that FACT conducted to date with over 15,000 congregations. 276 of them were majority Latino congregations, meaning that over 50% of the participants of the congregation self-identify as Latino. Data for this study also came from the EPIC 2021 First Wave Survey, which was 2,000 congregations. 30 of those are majority Latino congregations. And then I also looked at the majority Latino congregations that were in the regional case studies. 8 of them were in those case studies across the US. 3 of those congregations were in the Metro Denver area alone, and I oversaw the research conducted in the Metro Denver area. So before we get into the financial aspects of Latino congregational life from this data, I want to share some of the overall patterns and trends that were analyzed from these data sets. So overall, 7 out of 10 majority Latino congregations Faith communities where Latinos comprise at least 50% of all participants are evangelical Protestant in affiliation. This is followed by 15.1% that are mainline Protestant, 12.8% that are Catholic and Orthodox, and a very small 0.3% that are affiliated with another religious tradition. And that might include Baha'i, Muslim, Jewish, with this percentage likely reflecting an undercount in some cases. Unsurprisingly, the percentage of Latino Catholic congregations in the US is more than twice that of non-Latino Catholic congregations. And that's important for this particular study. I'll say that again. The percentage of Latino Catholic congregations in the US is more than twice that of non-Latino Catholic congregations. And when I say Catholic and Orthodox, in the study, they're really Catholic congregations. I don't know if we actually had any Orthodox Latino majority congregations in the study. When it comes to the percentage of participants within each of these religious families, however, Catholic churches are home to 33.8%, a third of all Latino congregational worshipers. That's roughly 2.5 times the total percentage of Catholic churches. This means that Latinos represent an overrepresentation in Catholic congregations. Evangelical Protestant churches, which, as we said, are 71.8% of all Latino churches, are home to only 61.7% of Latino worshipers. And mainline Protestant churches are home to only 4.4% of worshipers, even though 15% of all of these churches are mainline Protestant. On the whole, Latino congregations tend to be larger than non-Latino congregations, with only 2 in 10 of these congregations worshiping 101 to 50 people, compared to roughly 4 in 10 non-Latino congregations worshiping 1 to 50 people in any given week. Latino faith communities also have a median of 80 for weekly worship attendance, which is higher than non-Latino congregations who only have a median of 65 attendees. Regarding size, Latino congregations often experience similar trends to US congregations as a whole, with the vast majority of worshipers attending the largest congregations. Roughly 7 out of 10 worshipers attend congregations of over 250, though they only constitute about 12% of all majority faith communities. Conversely, only 15% of worshipers attend faith communities of 100 or fewer, but they comprise nearly 2/3 of all majority Latino congregations. And when you think about the previous slide, as the majority of participants are overrepresented in Catholic congregations, these are the congregations that tend to be larger as well and have more worshipers. In terms of growth and stability, like the US Latino population at large, these congregations are experiencing growth on the whole. Approximately 4 in 10 Latino faith communities experienced attendance growth of more than 5% over the last 5 years, and 18.2% remain relatively stable. These faith communities are not immune from decline altogether, though, as a little over a third, 38.2%, experienced attendance decline of more than 5% over the last 5 years as well. Still, as you can see between the light blue and the dark blue on this slide, the overarching picture for majority Latino congregations looks more promising than for other congregations. But time will tell whether dynamics of increasing non-affiliation and secularism will ultimately impact these faith communities. The nature of a congregation's relationship to its primary space of worship, however, differs greatly between Latino and non-Latino faith communities. As newer congregations with a median founding age date of 1991, majority Latino faith communities are nearly half as likely to own their own facilities at 34.7% than other congregations at 64.8%. This is coupled with increased renting of facilities, ownership by the denomination, and which is common for many Catholic parishes, and occurrence of other kinds of arrangements, such as free usage of facilities or even meeting in homes. So regardless of locational arrangement, Latino congregations also report that the facilities where they worship also house daycares or preschools, as well as other congregations that worship there at much greater rates than other congregations. And this makes sense because on average, participants of Latino congregations are younger and have fewer percentages of senior adults than majority non-Latino congregations. So while Latino congregations are comparable to others in terms of having more female than male participants, a lesser percentage of college graduates, in addition, a greater percentage live below the poverty line. Given these educational and economic realities, it makes sense that volunteerism within one's congregation may not be as prevalent among participants in majority Latino congregations. Around 34.8% report volunteering versus all other congregations, 43.7% report volunteering. This connotes that volunteerism, that individuals who volunteer have free time to engage in such activities beyond immediate financial and familial duties. Compounding these factors is the issue of citizenship and immigration status. Roughly half of participants in Latino faith communities are American-born, and 27% are identified as recent immigrants, meaning that they have only been in the US 0 to 5 years. This is compared with all other congregations that report an average of 87.4% American-born and only about 4% recent immigrant participants. However, while Latinos are often identified as a primarily immigrant population in the media and in society more generally, it's important to note that Latinos have actually been a declining share of the recent immigrant population since 2020. Despite lower levels of volunteerism reported, in almost every aspect of engagement, both within and beyond the congregation, majority Latino congregations place greater emphasis and report higher frequencies on activities than other congregations. For example, Latino faith communities reported their worship as a lot more contemporary, innovative, and inclusive of children and youth than other congregations. Along with this, Latino faith communities have a greater tendency to use electric guitar. Now, what I have shown here in terms of engagement are the top chart as spiritual activities, more emphasis on prayer, spiritual retreats, children's and adult religious education, and less emphasis on music programs in Latino congregations. In the bottom bar chart, this relates to community engagement and engagement with other denominational and faith groups. Across the board, Latinos report that they are more actively engaged in activities beyond their congregation, whether it be worship, educational or social activities, or community service. When it comes to leadership, who are leading these congregations? 2 in 10 leaders are unpaid for their roles within the congregation, as you'll see in the bar most left-hand side on this chart. In terms of time, 8 in 10 leaders are full-time, which is slightly higher than in other congregations. Part-time leaders work in their ministry roles a median of 20 hours per week. But regardless of whether Latino congregations are either full-time or part-time, over 1/3 have paid employment outside of their congregations. When it comes to theological education, 3 out of every 4 Latino congregational leaders do not have a Master of Divinity degree, which is often considered the professional degree for many U.S. clergy leaders. This is in stark contrast to nearly half of all other congregational leaders possessing this degree, and might account for a significant portion of these leaders having paid employment beyond the congregation. Because these faith community leaders are more likely to not be paid, they are also less likely to take a day off from paid employment, with a little more than half able to do this on a weekly basis compared to other congregational leaders, which you see on the most right-hand side of this chart. Most noticeable among majority Latino leaders is that a significant percentage are first-generation immigrants. Taken together with the data on education, compensation, employment status, and a need for other employment, it is likely the case that there exist barriers for a segment of these leaders to attain full-time professional employment in their congregations. And this is also likely compounded by a congregation's capacity to financially support its leaders. I'll just go through this briefly so we can get to the financial aspect of this presentation, but overall, Latino faith communities rely more heavily than others on informal means of technology-based communication. That includes social media, texting, and apps, which you'll see on the left-hand chart, rather than more formal means, such as email, e-newsletters, and websites on the right-hand side chart to foster connections within and beyond their congregations. Now to our financial patterns and findings in light of these more general statistics. The financial picture in majority Latino congregations reveals some bright spots, as well as some potential challenges for future sustainability. As newer worshiping communities, and as faith communities where a greater percentage of members earn less income and have less education, Latino congregations report a median annual income of $100,000, which is $20,000 less than the overall median, even though they have a higher weekly attendance than non-Latino congregations. As a result, per capita giving in Latino faith communities by average attendance is only $1,250 versus $2,000 per capita for all other congregational participants. For congregations across the board, however, financial income, expenditures, and other resources are mediated by size. And the same is true for majority Latino congregations as well. For the smallest ones, median income is only $28,000 roughly, but increases as average weekly worship attendance increases, as you might expect. Looking at income and expenses a little bit more closely in detail, on average, 73.5% of income for these congregations comes from participant contributions such as tithes, pledges, and offerings. 17% from fundraising events, and 4.7% from rental income. And the rest are a combination of endowments, investments, school tuition, if the church has a school, capital campaigns, and other incomes. What's interesting about income, however, is that nearly quadruple the average percentage of Latino congregations' income comes from fundraising when compared with other congregations' income. For all other congregations, only an average of 4.0% of total U.S. congregations' incomes come from fundraising. So the ability to garner funds through creative means seems to be unique to majority Latino congregations and is something to pay attention to. In terms of expenses, this is very similar to congregations as a whole. The greatest expense is staffing, followed by buildings and operations, and then program expenses and mission and benevolence. Considering income and expenses through the lens of growth and decline, majority faith communities that are Latino report relative stability in attendance over the past 5 years, have much higher per capita rates than those in declining and growing congregations combined. This is quite different than the overall picture of congregational life in the US, where declining churches had the most per capita in both income and expenses, with growing and stable congregations being fairly comparable. This is really an interesting finding. So stable congregations have a per capita income of over $4,000 and per capita expenses of $4,500, which places a heavy burden on participants to maintain current staffing levels and building operations. Notably, stable Latino congregations are the most likely to rent their facilities, with over half indicating that they do not own their space or have free use of it. This poses a challenge for the long-term sustainability of Latino congregations that have to pay for space on a regular basis, as they are neither accruing equity or savings for the future nor allocating funds to other parts of their ministries, both of which impact present and future thriving. Stable Latino congregations are also more likely to have full-time leaders. So if per capita costs become unsustainable for these faith communities, they may need to consider moving staff to part-time status. This once again impacts the congregation as a whole with regard to its long-term sustainability. In looking at self-assessed financial health over time, a congregation's assessment of its own health is critical, especially in planning toward long-term sustainability. In general, Latino congregations report that their financial health is better today than it was 5 years ago, and you'll see that reflected on the chart in front of you. While fewer faith communities, 3.5%, would rate their health today as excellent compared to 5 years ago, a significantly higher percentage, 45.7%, indicate that their financial health is good in juxtaposition to 5 years ago, when only 10.7% indicated this. By size, medium-sized majority Latino congregations report being in better financial health than smaller or larger congregations. This is consistent with trends for all US congregations, but is interesting given that medium-sized congregations also report higher per capita. Larger Latino faith communities report with greater frequency than other sizes having serious or some financial difficulty, which is interesting, 22.6%. For these congregations, it is unknown the cause of such difficulties. However, it is likely that staffing and building maintenance costs are contributors. The COVID-19 pandemic also impacted how Latino congregations reported on their financial health. Pre-lockdown, 62.7% of faith communities indicated that their financial health was good or excellent. Post-lockdown, only 26.1% of congregations indicated the same, and 42% reported that they had serious or some difficulty. This trend is mirrored across all US congregations, but it is reflected more drastically with Latino faith communities. This poses another significant challenge for these congregations as Latinos and other communities of color were impacted more seriously by the pandemic health-wise than majority white communities. So how denominations and other faith traditions are addressing the financial challenges facing Latino congregations impacted by COVID-19 should be a conversation of priority. Perhaps the part of the reason for such increased financial difficulty from pre to post lockdown was the loss of income in the form of giving. Overall income decreased from a median of 113,000 roughly pre-lockdown to $40,000 post-lockdown. This decrease is a likely factor in dramatic drops in the use of online giving, which you see in the chart on the bottom. Interestingly, while the percentage of Latino congregations that reported utilizing online giving increased similarly across all U.S. congregations, the percentage of both participants who used online giving and the percentage of regular monthly income from online giving decreased dramatically for Latino faith communities. You see that here with an average of 33% of participants giving online pre-lockdown and the decrease to 21% post-lockdown. Pre-lockdown, Latino congregations reported an average of 32.7% of all giving, which was done online, but post-lockdown, an average of only 11.7% of giving was completed online. Majority Latino faith communities are as diverse financially as they are in other ways. And as you can see, these differences can be parsed by size, religious family, and growth and decline, among other characteristics. But despite these challenges, on the whole, I want to say that Latino congregations remain in good financial health and display a great deal of resilience. Given the tenuous financial state of many Latino congregations for the long term, however, finding ways to gain equity and secure more stable means of income will be important considerations for leaders and their participants, and especially their denominations or faith traditions that support them. So in conclusion, there are a number of distinct differences between Latino congregations and other congregations, as I've shown. Growth in attendance, younger participants, active community engagement, prevalent spiritual practices and social media use, and spiritual vitality, among other things, signal that Latino congregations are a dynamic part of religious life in the U.S. And as you've seen, these congregations are not without these challenges. With substantive contingency of leaders being employed beyond their faith communities and unpaid in their ministry roles, many congregations renting their facilities, most having lower average income and higher per capita expenses, and giving decreased post-lockdown, these congregations must begin to address some of these systemic issues in order to ensure their continued vitality and viability. And how these communities continue to adapt to meet these new opportunities posed by this growing segment of the US population remains to be seen, but it is clear that Latino congregations are on the rise within American religious life. And this presentation is part of a larger report that I've completed for my fellowship on Latino congregations in the United States. And you can find those reports on both the EPIC website, which is www.covidreligionresearch.org, and the FACT Faith Communities Today website, www.faithcommunitiestoday.org. And the report is found in both Spanish and English. So you are free to download it. There's no cost to it, and to share this with those who might have an interest in this presentation. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to the questions.
Kristina, first, thank you so much for breaking down all those stats. Really insightful and interesting to kind of see some of how those different stats land and stuff. What I want to do right now is invite people to put questions into the chat box. Any questions you have, I have a few I'm going to start off with, but any questions you have right now, please put them in the chat box. So a first question for your consideration, Kristina, would just be on any surprising findings from this research for you, anything that surprised you and what you learned about?
Yeah, I think there were several surprising findings. The first finding, I think financially, had to do with the fundraising. That majority Latino congregations get their income from fundraising at a much higher rate than other congregations. And there's something to be learned there about how that happens and what these congregations are doing. that the data itself doesn't show. So that's one surprising finding. Another surprising finding is that I've shared is that stable congregations have a higher per capita, which is not something that you see in financial data. Usually it's declining congregations have a higher per capita and are unable to sustain that over time, especially if they're declining. And so it's interesting to me how Latino congregations are sustaining even amidst large costs, whether it's rental income, staffing support, rental facilities and staffing support, how that will continue to perhaps shift, but maybe remain the same over time.
That was actually a question I had myself. I was curious about that one in particular. Kristina, what about there was something about there was lower levels of volunteerism, yet there was less paid staff. So that means people were actually in Latino communities are volunteering for things that maybe other communities people get paid for. So how does that make sense with lower volunteering, yet people were doing some volunteering where other people were getting paid? Does that make sense? Or
Yes, that's an interesting thing because the data also showed that Latino congregations are very active and engaged with faith groups, prayer groups, support groups, and volunteers are needed for those kinds of activities. And so I wondered whether just an understanding of what volunteerism meant, or even the word volunteering, but and I think there are some other sociological research that shows that volunteering can often be a racialized term and might be seen by some folks as one thing, whereas in Latino communities, volunteering is just what you do to help your family, to help your
yes.
church. And so I wondered about the survey data there, because even amidst lower volunteering, if you use the word volunteering, someone may say, well, I don't volunteer, I just do these things as part of their service. And so the engagement was still really high.
That makes a lot of sense. I've got a comment for you to reflect on, Kristina. I'll just read it to you. We have a growing Latino community in our church. We're interested in how to get our Latino brothers and sisters to officially register at the parish. They attend, but they don't register. Any reflections on that?
Oh, that's it. That is interesting. Yeah, and I don't know what this might have to do with in terms of population, but if it's a highly immigrant population, putting one's name down in a registration might signal something that they don't want to have their name, especially if they're undocumented, perhaps. Or it might mean an obligation to, for example, giving at a certain rate. And so if the expectations perhaps aren't clear in registering, what might that making those expectations clear, or saying there are no expectations for that. And I think probably the uncertainty with what registration might mean at a particular parish might be important. And in regard to folks who might be undocumented, I would imagine putting one's name down, and would that be a public list? Would someone's name be subject to then viewing by government authorities, that sort of thing? So just sort of maybe some uncertainties in that regard, particularly for newer immigrants who don't know what that means. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's what I would imagine.
Yeah, I've also heard people say just not accustomed in the countries where people are coming from. It's just a foreign concept. You don't do that in your church in your home country in Latin America. So it needs to be explained well because it's the foreign. It's not something that's normally done. So it's just an unusual concept.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, definitely.
another question: what do you think has changed in terms of financial trends in these congregations now that we're 4 years post lockdown from COVID?
Yes, I will say that there is newer data and newer research since 2020 that is showing that congregations as a whole are recovering well from the pandemic. So many of these congregations have increased income and also increased expenses, hired different staff, even since the lockdown. So that is data that can be found in reports on the EPIC webpage, the www.covidreligionresearch.org page, because they are putting out reports every month, every other month, on the changes post-COVID as they're tracking that over the next few years. It's a 5-year project. So I know that things are better. I will also say that we're continuing to see greater division and greater challenges with the very smallest congregations who might be continuing to decline, and the largest congregations who are having challenges with like maintaining these large congregations in terms of staff and program and all of that. And I would suspect that Latino congregations might be facing those similar challenges, just as a part of the whole that all congregations are facing.
Great. Two other questions just came in. So if Latinos learn more on social media than email, how do we effectively communicate information, example regarding religious education with them? We put the emails both in Spanish and English, but people aren't reading them.
Yeah, that's a good question. So if Latinos are more are using social media more frequent, and social media also included texting, so text groups and text chains. For example, I'm on several WhatsApp groups. WhatsApp is a very well-known and I think globally used platform. You can text someone all around the world with WhatsApp. And so perhaps creating a group of your congregants on WhatsApp and sharing information that way, rather than email that people may not tend to read. So thinking of creative ways to get information the ways that folks are receiving them is a helpful, I think that's a good learning from the data that we've seen.
I have a background working with different immigrant communities. Everyone uses WhatsApp to communicate. So getting a WhatsApp group would be a great idea for stuff you want to communicate, because it's on people's phone. They'll read it quickly. It'd be much better than email for sure. Another question, Kristina, in terms of creating more sustainable congregation finances, did you come across any churches' support for home-based businesses, entrepreneurship, or formalizing some small businesses, et cetera, as a successful practice?
Ooh, that's a great question. Those questions were not asked in these kinds of surveys, but I would imagine that these things are happening and might relate to the greater percentage of Latino congregations who use fundraising, right? So I imagine fundraising might include businesses, use of resources and goods that folks are creating in their small businesses as a source of that fundraising income for the congregation, and congregations as supporting small business entrepreneurship and formalizing those kinds of things makes sense to me. Unfortunately, we didn't ask those questions. So I think that would be a great question or follow-up that we might pursue in our regional ethnographic case studies that we're currently doing within these congregations for the EPIC project.
Any other questions anyone has? Well, I want to comment on that. When I think of when you have your food for events and stuff like that, it's either volunteers or some woman's got a little business she does out of her home and makes the food and stuff like that. So I bet there is some stuff in terms of there's small business, home-based businesses being supported by those communities, maybe aren't in the data yet. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I would say that for immigrant communities at large, not just Latino congregations, like Asian congregations, African congregations. I see that as a common theme in those kind of first and second generation majority congregations as well.
Agree. Well, I think if there's no more questions, we're going to start to wrap things up. First, thanks to everyone who attended. Hope you got some new insights and learning from all those different interesting little stats and all the way they were broken down. Special thanks to Kristina Lizardy-Hajbi for sharing her research with us. The recording of this presentation will be put on the Center for Church Management website, and I'll email out to you in a couple of days a link to that, so you have access both to the recording as well as to the PowerPoint if you want to go through those stats more. I want to put a plug in again for our Masters of Science in Church Management degree, which I mentioned earlier. Again, we're taking applications now. The program starts in May. There's lots of scholarship opportunities as well. And I'll include a flyer in that email to you. A reminder to welcome you back here next Friday. We take a little bit of a turn in our 3-part webinar series. So our first 2 webinars have been on Latino communities and congregations. This next one will be a totally different turn. It's Professor Stephen Porth from St. Joe's University. He'll be giving a presentation on Catholic foundations, an analysis of government structures, transparency, and financial performance. I'm going to stop the recording here in a second. I want to invite anyone who wants to stick around to ask Kristina an individual question they can. Otherwise, thank you so much. Have a blessed day. Hope to see you next week.